Hello again, everyone. Edwin Leonard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be dissertating and talking about, in my opinion, the most unusual zodiac sign, and yes, does apply and pertain to the sun, moon, and ascendant. So let me get started. Now, let me start off with Aries. Well, Aries could be very blunt. They could be very courageous, have a lot of fortitude. They could be Aries people can be fearless, sometimes combative and sometimes acrimonious. They could be somewhat quick-tempered. They often will stand up for others when no one else will. I don't think there's anything in their makeup or composition, though, that would equate to them being the most unusual sign, so I say no as far as Aries goes. Now, Taurus. Taurus can be known for their stolidness. They could be very conservative, very reliable, very stable. They're often about the true and the tried. They could be very persistent, and they are known for their predictability. Taurus can even be seen as somewhat monotonous by others. So really, to me, when you have a sign that's so consistent, so dependable, there's nothing there to state that Taurus would be the most unusual sign. So I would say emphatically no for Taurus. Now let's go to Gemini. Now Gemini could be a contender for the most unusual sign. They could be unpredictable. Geminis can be very mercurial, changeable. They could even be fickle. Geminis can be exceptionally loquacious. Sometimes they're even known to not let the other person get a word in edgewise in conversations, I believe. Their contradictory nature can make them somewhat unusual. Geminis could be very restless and really they don't have a lot of predictability. They could be rather inconsistent. They could go one way with something one minute and then go completely the opposite the next. They're a contender for the most unusual sign, but I don't see them as the most unusual zodiac sign. I think they just miss it by a little bit. Anyway, Cancer. Well, Cancer is similar to Taurus. Cancer can be very traditional and very conventional, discreet. They can have a very strong emphasis on introversion. So there's a little bit of unusualness as far as Cancer goes, as far as the homebody thing is concerned. Cancers can also be very sensitive. They might take things personally, sometimes maybe a little bit too much, but they're very family oriented, and they're dominated often by their home and family existence. But I don't see Cancer as far from the most unusual zodiac signs, so no for Cancer. Now, as far as Leo goes, Leos can be very dignified, very proud. They can be very flamboyant, charismatic. They can often draw attention quicker than most other people can just by being themselves. They often have tremendous presence, which can make them very good actors and actresses. And even on the negative side, sometimes can be seen as a little bit arrogant or egotistical. But Leos, to me, are not. This is not a sign that I would equate with being the most unusual sign based on their general makeup of characteristics. So, the next sign, Virgo. Well, Virgo can be rather shy, reticent. They could be humble. They could be very analytical. They could also have a very strong intellectual side and be able to spot details where a lot of other people will not see them. But Virgos can also rather be very introverted as well. They could be very much to themselves, but there's nothing really unusual about them, in my opinion, that has any strong uniqueness. So I say no to Virgo. Now, as far as Libra goes, Libra could be very charming, very diplomatic. Being an air sign, they could have a plethora of intellectual ideas. They have a very even temperament. It really, they can be very tactful. Libras can often have very refined interests, but I don't see Libra as being the most unusual zodiac sign. They have good artistic ability often, but there's nothing there in their makeup to suggest that they are the most unusual zodiac sign. So let me go now to Scorpio. Well, Scorpio could be very intense, rather willful, very resourceful and secretive. Their spirit can be indomitable. They have so much willpower in them and very tenacious. They're very hard to conquer in life, and they really, a Scorpio can have a certain uncanny ability to bounce back from adversities. They could be very resilient. But is there enough to say that they're the most unusual zodiac sign? I think not. So Scorpio, I say, is a nay for them as well. Now let me go to Sagittarius. Well, Sagittarius can be sometimes flighty. They could be very philosophical. They could have a plethora of ideas. They don't always follow through on them. They're not the most reliable people, but they could be very expansive and optimistic, and they could give life to even the most drab or dull party. So but there's really, despite them, they could be rather visionary, and they could have an unusual quality for this. They could often be prophetic, and even despite being very blunt and outspoken, they're often very accurate on their marks. So, but is it really, are they the most unusual zodiac sign? I think not. So let me go to Capricorn now. Well, Capricorn can be really serious and orthodox, very consistent and conventional. Capricorns can appear very regular. They can be very conservative, have good pragmatism and practicality. They're often about the true and the tried, and really they can have very strong ambition and also have very good business acumen. They could be very astute economically as far as financial dealings go with business especially. So for me, there's something. Capricorn is really, of all the signs, I think it would be the least unusual, at least in my opinion. Now let me go to Pisces. Well, Pisces can be somewhat ambiguous. They can have a lot of ambivalence and confusion about them. They have a mysterious quality, and they might, to me, because they could be kind of ambiguous and they're a little bit of an enigma to people, they can be a contender for the most unusual sign, I think. And the fact a lot of times Pisces can be very malleable and sometimes will act different. They're more apt to act differently around different people. But I don't think there's enough there to qualify as the most unusual sign. They could have an unusual gift, maybe of all the signs for prophecy, perhaps, as far as being intuitive, but not the most unusual zodiac sign. So here it is, people. Unequivocally, I think the zodiac sign Aquarius is the most unusual zodiac sign. Aquarians can be very eclectic, very eccentric. They could be very unorthodox and unpredictable, and I think they're just very unusual. They could disdain convention. What's interesting about Aquarius, makes them so unusual and I think and very unique, is that they could be very paradoxical in manifold ways. They might spend an exorbitant amount of money on big items and maybe be very frugal regarding smaller ones, or they might spend a little bit on big items and be more extravagant with the smaller ones. So, and also what's interesting about them is that they could be very progressive in thinking, but yet very set and very fixed and intractable in their opinions and in their ways. Aquarians are also, what's interesting about them, as I've talked about in previous videos, is that Aquarius can have the universal friend syndrome, is how I refer to them. They could really make acquaintances very easily, but yet they're very hard to really know deeply. So I think also, in the unpredictability is strong about them. They are really a sign that can be very unpredictable. You don't know what they're going to do a lot of times. I think even in a crisis or emergency situation, I don't even think Aquarius knows his or herself what they're necessarily going to be doing. I think I had a friend at one time who has an Aquarius ascendant, and I was in the front passenger seat, and he surprised me completely. He drove, instead of going the conventional way through a parking lot to get to this business complex or whatever, he drove up the grass hill. And that's how he got there. And he just did it very spontaneously and abruptly. It really surprised me. And I mean, that's just kind of like typical Aquarian behavior, I think. And the thing about them is they have a very strong innovative and ingenious quality to them. And a lot of them could be ahead of their own time. Now, renowned physicist I think it's Alessandro Volta, was born on the Aquarius Pisces cusp. As far as his sun sign goes, I couldn't find a time of birth for him online. And he invented the electric battery. And what's interesting about that is that, as many of you may know, Uranus rules Aquarius, and Uranus is associated with what? Electricity. And sometimes we see Aquarians can really be people that will attempt things that are very audacious and courageous that others will not even consider. Now, there is a man named Nick Wallenda who is an Aquarius sun. He became the first person to walk over the Grand Canyon with a high wire in 2013. What's interesting about Aquarians, too, is that it's funny, despite their real unorthodox way and their idiosyncratic behavior at times, it seems like we're accepting of them when they act that way, but not necessarily of people of other signs. I think a lot of that is attributed to because Aquarians have such a benign way about them. They could be very humanitarian, very selfless, and I think that kind of supersedes the idiosyncratic behavior that we see, at least in our minds, and it surpasses that. A lot of their good qualities, they're very amiable, they often have a very good disposition, and they're really very giving people. So I think a lot of it is attributed to that. I think what's interesting too is that when you see Aquarius in sports, they could be very transcendent. I mean, you have Muhammad Ali, who has an Aquarius moon. I mean, no one can really doubt that he was kind of ahead of his own time in his sport. I mean, he dominated his opponents. He was very fast, very agile and mobile. Despite, he had a Leo rising, so obviously very flamboyant, maybe even ostentatious, but he backed it up in the ring. Now, and then you have Stephen Curry, as many of you may know, he's an NBA professional basketball player, and he is like hitting 35, 40-foot shots like he has an Aquarius moon. He hits them like it's nothing, like tying a shoelace. So he's kind of revolutionizing the way the game is played, I think. And I think a lot of it has to do with his Aquarian moon, and he also has his Mercury in Aquarius as well. Now, and another thing, too, is that what's interesting, on another note, that many of you may have seen the series MacGyver, and that starred Richard Dean Anderson. He played MacGyver, and he would basically come up with these ingenious plans to outwit or outmaneuver the situation or extricate himself from some situation. And I can remember there was some episode where he was taking these jugs of water and using rope to set up as a trap for somebody. And anyway, he has an Aquarius sun, which is no shocker to me because, as I've stated in previous videos, I believe a lot of times actors and actresses are often at least subconsciously drawn to roles that are compatible and correspond with their astrological nature. And what's interesting, too, about the MacGyver series, imagine this, Henry Winkler, who produced MacGyver, he has an Aquarius ascendant, and they were in his ascendant at Aquarius was 2 degrees. Richard Dean Anderson, who played MacGyver, has his sun at 3 degrees Aquarius. Imagine that. Oh, I'm flabbergasted and in a state of shock over this, that they're so close to each other. So I think Henry Winkler was interested in this because maybe he's the kind of person that's interested in maybe people using ingenuity and expressing originality in ways, in various ways. So I think obviously it was a good fit, and the show, best of my recollection, was fairly successful during its run. Well, anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment for the most unusual zodiac sign, and stay tuned next time where I'll be continuing my transits in the house series. 2 things I want to get with you on before I head out. Firstly, the stars may impel but do not compel. And secondly, never isolate any single astrological element, aspect, planetary placement, position, configuration, influence, or what have you, and make an analysis of a person, astrologically speaking, based on this alone, because astrologically speaking, the person is the sum of all their components in their natal chart, and not just one. Until next time, people, stay well.